Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine in Cleveland, Ohio. This is the All Access Med School Admissions Podcast. Hello again, everybody. I'm your host, Christian Essman, and I'm the Senior Director of Missions and Financial Aid here at the medical school, and it's great to be with you again. This one is just kind of checking in with my listeners. Featuring schools right now is a little hard because a lot of admissions people are swamped, including myself. So finding like the bandwidth to add one more thing to your plate can be a little challenging. So just know that I'm working behind the scenes and talking to some schools right now to get them lined up as soon as we can. Before I get into the content that I want to share with you today, I want to mention that on Saturday, November 12th, 2022, there is a big free pre-med fair that's in a conjunction with the AAMC's National Conference, and that's going to be in Nashville, Tennessee. So if you're a high school student, a college student, grad student, non-traditional student, and you're in the Nashville area, November 12th, you can stop by this fair. It goes all day long on Saturday, and it's at the main conference center there in Nashville. So you'll find a link in the show description for how to register for it, and have all the details there. So we'll be there along with a bunch of other medical schools. So if you're there, stop by our table and say hi, and it'd be nice to meet you in person. So it's early November 2022, and we are in the middle of the 2022-2023 cycle, and the 2023-2024 cycle, believe it or not, is already on the horizon. So I wanted to give you just kind of some big picture updates on where we are right now in the 22-23 cycle, and then we'll talk a little bit about what to expect coming up around the corner for 23-24. So I thought I'd share with you some of the big picture application stats, and so just because I think it's interesting. So right now, compared to where we were last year, applications nationally are actually down 6%. But interestingly, they're up 6% at Case Western. And the average number of schools that applicants are applying to this year is just about the same as last year. On average, applicants are applying to 18 medical schools. I remember when the average used to be 13 schools. It was like that for a long time. But that has since spiked up a little bit. So what kind of trends are we seeing this year? Or how do I think we're seeing this year? I feel like I'm seeing more applicants, writing more reflective descriptions of their experiences versus like in the past, some applicants just wrote more about what their role was in activities and didn't write much about what they learned or how they grew or what challenged them in that particular activity. So I feel like we're seeing the message maybe getting out there to use those 750 characters in those experiences sections to really go deep and to share what you took away from those experiences, because it really helps us kind of get to know who you are and versus just the facts of hearing about what your role was. The other thing I feel like we've been talking internally this year is I feel like we're seeing more reapplicants. And I've said many times there's no shame in reapplying to medical school, but you got to make changes to your application before you reinitiate it, but there's no shame in reapplying. And looking at the national data, it would suggest that these feelings are correct, as we, Case Western, we have a 2% increase in reapplicants in our pool, but actually nationally, reapplicants are down slightly by 1%. So it's about the same as last year as far as national applicants go, but we're seeing a little bump in reapplicants. And let's see, what else? Incidentally, the AAMC has a lot of applicant matriculant data that I recommend that you take a look at. The site is called FACTS, and FACTS, and they slice and dice previous application cycle data up in a bunch of different ways. So take a dive into that site sometime. I know I always find something new and interesting, and I think it's a great place for prospective applicants to kind of get in there and roll up your sleeves and look through that data a little bit, because you can find some insightful, sometimes predictive data in there as well. So facts. And you'll find a link to that in the show description too. Let's see. How about other trends? Well, hey, when it comes to interviewing remotely, I think we've all come a long way, becoming more accustomed to platforms like Zoom and Microsoft Teams for our interview days. Everyone seems more comfortable with it. I can foresee a lot of schools sticking with virtual interviewing going forward. Obviously, we chose to stay remote this year, and man, am I glad we did. I mean, every time I see gas prices and airfares and hotel rates, everything is gone up. I mean, and really not just a little bit, but a lot, right? And I'm so happy we stayed remote. I can't imagine how applicants would be able to afford to do in-person interviewing like we used to do. And so imagine applying to 18 schools, and then you get, let's say, half of those you get interviews at. So you're flying and driving to 9 different med schools across the country. I mean, now we are saving applicants a boatload of money. And just know this too, now that a lot of med schools have stayed doing remote interviewing, many are offering open houses and visit weekends for accepted students, particularly in the spring. So in that way, if you want to travel, do it a little more with the target and not quite the expense that we had before when you were spending the money to go interviewing and then sometimes going back and revisiting. So you can use your money a little bit more smartly that way. So yeah, so if you're accepted to med schools, just remember that a lot of medical schools are hosting in-person things. We want you to come to campus. We want to come meet you in person and families and partners and stuff like that. So many of us have kind of switched to offering more opportunities to come and visit us. So very school specific, but keep your eyes out for those opportunities. Okay, so how about what if you're applying this cycle? Any tips or advice right now? Well, what if you haven't heard anything yet? You applied maybe back in June or July or August and you haven't heard from schools yet. Should you get in touch with those schools? Well, I guess my answer is it depends. It depends. You have to find out, do the medical schools accept updates from applicants? And if you've been listening long enough, you've heard that some medical schools don't want to hear from applicants because it just opens the floodgates, and it already takes a long time to screen an application, let alone adding in all kinds of updates. And other schools are open to it. So try to do a little homework and see if they accept updates. And if so, can you pass something along to them indicating that, hey, I'm still interested. I'm still out here. Just haven't heard from you. But just know this. I know it's November, and just in the life cycle of the application process, we still have a ways to go. And this is a long application process. And I know that it creates a lot of anxiety. It's a very slow process. But I thought I'd just describe to you a little bit the way the applications come in. And so it's in beginning of July, we start getting our first download of AMCAS applications. And like the first day, you may get 100 or so. Then the next day you get, 100 or maybe 75. And the next day, then it really starts picking up. And it's almost like a tsunami of AMCAS applications. And then the secondaries go out and then those get returned. And so you really, at first you think, oh, we can stay on top of this. And then the next thing you know, you're buried in applications. And it takes a long time to get through these. Some medical schools have a small army of people that screen applications, and others have a small core group of people that screen applications. And so screening applications in a really timely manner it's a perennial issue for a lot of medical schools. This comes up when we're sitting at like roundtable discussions with other admissions people and like, how do you get through these? Like what other things are you doing, and sharing ideas and practices and stuff. So many of us in med school admissions don't have large groups of screeners like our undergrad admissions colleagues sometimes that do the screening applications. We don't have those big, large teams like some undergrad admissions offices do. And also, there isn't necessarily a required standard for how applications are screened. And schools sometimes have their dean of admissions read through every med school application, which I can't imagine how long that would take. So maybe there's a screening team, but they make a recommendation and the dean of admissions has to look at every one. There isn't, like I said, there's not a standard across all admissions, med school admissions, of like how applications have to be screened. So everybody does something a little bit differently. So it can take some time. So I guess if you haven't heard yet, just hang in there. I know it's easy for me to say, but just know that there's a process at every place and it just takes a long time to get through these. What if you've interviewed already and you've been placed on the wait list at a medical school or medical schools? What should you do then? I had an applicant ask me the other day, should they send a letter of intent now? And my advice would be, look, we're still early in the interview process as well, too. And so my advice might be to save that kind of letter for the springtime, like March, April, because based on what I've learned about how other admissions committees work, they don't always come back and re-review applicants at admissions committee meetings who've already been placed on the wait list or alternate list. I don't get the feeling a lot of admissions committees, they're focusing on the applicants they just interviewed, not going back and re-reviewing ones that we've already seen. So when it comes to wait lists and alternate lists, again, there's not really a standard for this either. So how med schools need to set them up. So I would say hang on to one of those letters of intent until it gets a little bit later in the spring. That way it might have more impact. And maybe in your letter, you can say, all right, hey, I've interviewed at X number of schools and maybe I have an acceptance to a couple places or one place, but you are my first love and I'm on your alternate list and I'd like to come there. So that might have greater impact in March or April. So how some schools, how they set up their alternate list or wait list, some have a ranking and your letter of intent won't change anything. Everybody has a spot. They put every applicant on their alternate list in a spot, and it's just going to take time for you to for them to get to that spot. So, and I've heard people I've interviewed on this show have said that they don't take letters of intent because they have a ranking and it's not going to change anything. So there's that. Whereas some other schools don't rank. And they use the alternate list in a sense to shape or kind of round out their class. So they have some latitude into where they can go on their list. And so this is where a letter of intent might have greater value. But I'll tell you what, the most waitlist action really doesn't happen until the very end of April, early May. The decision date this year is May 1st. And so that's when everybody has to pick, if they're accepted, you got to have one, you have to whittle your acceptances down to one on that day. And that's where we start to see if we need to start hitting our wait list. And so it really doesn't happen until right there at the end of April, beginning of May. And that's really when the dust kicks up. So we're still kind of a ways off from that, right? So if you're on wait list right now, just hang in there. I've seen applicants on a number of wait lists and then May hits and it starts pouring on them with acceptance offers. Like every day they're getting a new acceptance offer. So, and it's kind of blows them away where they've been waiting for so long and all of a sudden, they're getting phone calls every day from other medical schools. So that it happens. So the wait list is not always a bad place to be. So the med school admissions process is vastly different than the undergrad admissions process. We med school admissions have far fewer spots and don't usually have as much latitude in filling our classes. Like many of us have to essentially hit a class target size. And so no more, no less. And so we have to be very careful with our enrollment management and the acceptances that we put out. So that's why you might see more applicants being put on the wait list than being accepted, because we have to be very mindful in our enrollment management because we have to hit a target. And our classes are really small compared to undergraduate universities. So just keep that in mind too. All right. So what if you're listening and you're planning to apply for the next cycle? Well, I have some updates and some tips for you. Well, okay, so right now, I would say now's not a bad time to start getting your list of schools together. And you're like, well, it's November and the next cycle doesn't begin until next May. Well, May will be here before you know it. And a number of medical schools require things called situational judgment tests. And those come in the form of a test called Casper. It's by Altus Suite. And there's the AAMC's Preview. That's their situational judgment test. And then there's another one called Cura that a handful of med schools use. I believe WashU uses that. And so some of these test dates start opening up in January, like Casper has test dates in January, Preview has test dates in March. And so these are some things you got to kind of map out. And so if you can get maybe these done before the application process starts for 23-24, this will be one more thing that you don't have to worry about. So take a look at those websites. So get your tentative list of medical schools in mind, and then start to look and see, do they require those situational judgment tests? And then what's the registration process? And when can you start to get those on your calendar to get them teed up so that that's not a piece of the application that's delaying the completion of it. And then it comes to MCAT registration dates. So everybody's got to take the MCAT for the most part. So start looking at those registration dates and getting those on your calendar. Like, what do you want that study period to look like? When do you want to plan on taking the MCAT? When would you like to get that score back? Because it takes 30 days to get the score back. So keeping those things in mind. And I recently met with a representative from MCAT and their outreach services, and we were going over discussing a lot of the resources that they offer in preparing for the MCAT and their partnership with Khan Academy. And I want to tell you, be sure to spend some time looking over their MCAT resources site and take advantage of them. They're free, and the partnership with Khan Academy is open. And so there's a great way there to kind of complement your studying using the AAMC's resources. So I'll put links to those as well in the show descriptions. Something else you could be doing right now if you're getting ready to apply for 23-24. I've mentioned several times on my show that you should be keeping some kind of living document, like a journal or like a Google Doc that you update with your experiences, and start to gather the data and the information that you need for those experiences, like the contact information. Who's the contact person? Is it your PI, or who was the leader of that organization or club that you were in? And start to estimate the hours that you participated in it, and jot down like stories and memories from those experiences that you might be able to use in your descriptions of them. So just start working on that stuff now, and that could be a document that you can work on and save, and maybe something else comes to mind, you can go back to it and add to it. So you can be doing that. And so if you want to get an idea of what those descriptions look like, and for the experiences section, look at the AMCAS guide just look at the one for this year. It really won't change for next year. And you can see what kinds of information you have to provide. Like I said, contact info and hours and things like that. So take a look at that. I'll put a link in the show notes to the application guide for this year. All right. And what about, and you know what? AMCAS has some new and modified fields coming for the 23-24 application cycle that I wanted to pass along to you as well. They're kind of nice. One is they're adding a new experience type. So when you're listing your experiences, you're able to classify them as like work and medically related work and volunteer and shadowing. And so there's a classification category. And they have a new one this year. And it's called social justice / advocacy. And I think the admissions people at Minnesota have been pushing for this for the last couple of years. And they're adding that one in there, which I think is really cool, because I know a lot of applicants have become more socially minded and advocating. And so really cool. I'm glad that they added that in there, so applicants can designate that as an experience. Another one that's worth noting is in the biographic section. They're changing what used to be called the self-reported disadvantage status question to other impactful experiences. I don't know what the description is yet. I haven't seen it, but the self-reported disadvantage status, the subsection, it asks like if you'd like to designate to medical schools to consider you a disadvantaged applicant. And it said, like, you might consider yourself disadvantaged if you grew up in an area that was medically underserved or had insufficient access to social, economic, and educational opportunities. And so applicants would write a short little description of what that was. So again, in this application, you're writing a lot of little mini essays. So that's why I want to get this up on your radar. So again, I don't know what the prompt will be for other impactful experiences, but I have to think it'll be pretty close to that, but they're just changing some of the description and the name of it. And then lastly, one worth noting, WMC or the AMCAS is going to be having updates to their preferred pronouns and gender identities, which I think is great. So in the past, it was a little more limited. Now that it seems that they're going to be expanding that a little bit more. So there are some other, there's a few other updates that they're enhancing into the AMCAS, but these are the three that were worth highlighting. So again, like I said before, I'll put a link in the show description for the application guide for 22-23, so you can really start to see what is involved in this. It's a big application, and the guide is, I think, 88 pages long or something. So yeah, it's something to start looking at and getting a handle on. Speaking of experiences and activities, we did a presentation. Actually, our assistant director, Tom, he did most of it with a group from Cal Berkeley recently, and I jumped in on the end. And during the Q&A time during our presentation with them, a student asked us how they should go about creating a theme in their experiences and research. And I got to say, it kind of caught us off guard a little bit because I haven't heard that kind of question before. And it was as if somebody had told them that they need to have a theme in their experiences. And I got to say, it kind of threw us off because we never really look for necessarily a theme per se when we're screening applications. Like, does this applicant have a theme? And so for example, I think if your interest is, let's say, in ophthalmology, we medical schools don't expect that all of your experiences will line up with your interest in eyes. Like, you don't have to have volunteering with an organization that's collecting eyeglasses to be sent to another country, or you don't have to have research in ophthalmology. We don't expect that you will have shadowed all ophthalmologists. And now, are there applicants that have some of those kind of themes? Yeah, but that's based on their passion and interest, but we don't expect that you're going out and picking and choosing things because you think we want to see a theme. So I could see this becoming like something that's perpetuated in people on like pre-med, internet forums or something like that. But I have to tell you, we really are not looking for a theme. We want to see that you're pursuing things that you're excited about and you're passionate about, and how you want to go and participate in as you go and explore science and research and medicine. That should be your choice on how you want to do that and do those discoveries and explorations. So, don't think you have to have a theme. I want a little tangential there, but that came up and I wanted to mention that to you. So that's about it for my updates. This is, again, just kind of a short check-in with you. I'm going to be seeing a lot of admissions friends in Nashville here soon, so I hope to come back with some more content and some insight to pass along with you. And so, of course, if you love the show and you learn from it, I ask you to pay it forward. You share it with your friends and your pre-med groups, subscribe, leave a little review on Apple and Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. It helps other people find us more organically. But the biggest thing that helps us get the word out is you sharing it and telling your friends and pre-med friends about it. So keep doing that for me. I really appreciate it. So take care, and we'll talk to you again soon.